Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone enjoyed their Thanksgiving holiday. I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today, and my partner in podcasting is Tom Laidlaw, the former NHL defenseman for the New York Rangers and Los Angeles King. And this is the Laidlaw and Allen Report, coming to you twice a week to talk all things hockey. And Tom, the story that continues in the NHL is, Bill Peters, of course, resigned, but now all of a sudden, much like happened in the Me Too movement, the fact that Akeem Alou came out and talked, it's inspiring others to come out as well. And we've had discussions about the way that the Sutters have done business through the years. And yesterday or 2 days ago, Larry Brooks of the New York Post interviewed Sean Avery, who alleged that Mark Crawford, when he was head coach of the Los Angeles Kings, kicked him on the bench in response to he was the extra man in a too many men on the ice situation. I want to get into a discussion on what where the line is, but before we do that, just your read. I mean, Sean Avery has always been a lightning rod for issues. He was never a coach's favorite. He was always involved in things that left you shaking your head. And here we go again. I mean, you don't want coaches kicking players on the bench, but what's your read on this situation?
Well, is it interesting with Sean that he comes out, and I don't even know Sean Avery at all. He used to play with the Rangers, lives here in New York. I've never met the man. But it is interesting that he's involved and he comes out with a story now. And I'm not doubting him in any way. If he says it happened, we have to believe that it happened. You know what really strikes me? So I'm sitting there and I'm watching this all unfold. And clearly, like you said before, the Peters incident is the racial part is a whole different story altogether. But when you start talking about players getting kicked by coaches and everything, it's so funny how I look at it now. But when I played, those kind of things, when they did happen, and I can't really recall, I don't ever recall somebody, me witnessing a coach strike a player on the bench in any way. But I think when I played, it would be more kind of like how stupid that was or how funny that was. Now that I look back at it as I've removed from the game, I'm more like, it's just totally ridiculous. Like, why would anybody ever think that that's the right thing to do? When you're two adults, you're on the bench, you're both professionals playing in the National Hockey League, and a coach thinks it's appropriate to hit a player in any way. To me, that just kind of, it is amazing me that that's the different way I look at it now after I've removed the game. But it just is, there's no place in the game for it. I don't see how it's motivating. It's the same thing. I think I heard Brian Burke talking before about hazing and everything. I watched or listened to him on the NHL Network, the radio network, and it was really interesting, his take on it too, that has been outlawed for so long now. Cases are going to come up, people are going to talk about the things that they went through. But I used to think how hazing, I grew up with the fact that hazing was supposed to be some rite of passage or some ritual that made the team better or made the player better that was getting hazed. And I think back about now how barbaric that was, that it just served no purpose whatsoever. And it's amazing that, and listen, I lived in that time where we did that kind of stuff. And I go, what were we thinking about? It just has no place in the game whatsoever. It doesn't help the game at all either.
Yeah, I mean, some of the acts of hazing are dangerous when they go too far with drinking and so forth. And we've had, fatalities in the college fraternity ranks. I've read several stories about how it went too far. And, that's always, kind of an issue and those type of things. But, going back to the Avery story, Tom, one thing I wanted to point out that Larry Brooks, when he wrote the story, pointed out that Avery was more bemused than he was angered by what had happened. He seemed to think it was quite funny that Crawford would come down and give him a boot. And he even said, when he told the story, for those who haven't read the story, he said, how I liked, he's speaking to Larry Brooks, and he said, how I like to stand on the end of the bench. He's drawing a picture for Larry Brooks. Right. Here I am standing at the end of the bench, and Crawford comes down and gives me a boot. It left a mark, he said. And I can hear, I've interviewed Avery, and I found most of his antics, to be honest with you, distasteful. The whole thing with him and Marty Brodeur and waving the stick. And, it was almost like he was always trying to draw attention to himself. It didn't seem to me to be keeping in the spirit of the NHL team game. But saying all that, I could hear Avery sort of telling that story. And, Larry Brooks went out of his way to point out that that Avery was, again, that's the word that Larry used, bemused rather than angered by it. But
and didn't he, sorry to interrupt, but didn't he even talk about the fact how in practice the day before or something, Avery had flipped the puck in for a breakout drill and hit the coach in the head and cut him for 6 stitches? So
yeah, exactly. He gave background to the story, and that was, originally when the interview started out, he said, yeah, it all came about because I would messed up, and only he didn't use the word messed. I messed up a drill, and in so doing, I ended up shooting the puck, and I ended up catching Crawford, and he ended up getting stitches. And then Larry pressed him, well, so in the next game, he goes, no, but then we got into a game, and then we had an extra man on the ice, and I got blamed for that. And the weird thing about that was a 7-0 game that the Rangers lost. It was the sixth goal in a 7-0 game. Right. That Crawford went for. But saying all that, I do want to think, and you sort of allude to it, but I want to get down to more specific. So, we know what we don't want to see in the NHL for sure. We do not want to see the kind of a racial slur, a derogatory term. We've established some words that can be used now that when they do, you're demeaning a specific group. Those are out and so forth. We get all that, but now we get into the areas. I'm kind of working on a story about what's acceptable, Tom, and we get into the areas where are we talking about is it bullying to make a player skate for the entire practice? Is it bullying to single him out in front of the group? I mean, just where is the line? How much do we allow? And in the regular workplace, how many people have been singled out by their boss in front of their peers? I mean, is that any different? This opens up a real kind of a difficult time, I think, for coaches as they start to try to figure out, because I'm sure a lot of them are taking stock. I mean, why wouldn't you? Trying to figure out if what they're doing is too much.
Well, and I think too, it doesn't work even too. That's my question. As I look back and maybe look at some of the things that the coaches have done, do these tactics even work? So, as you know, Herb Brooks was one of my favorite coaches, and I think the stuff he did, like the skating. So you mentioned that it's a tactic amongst coaches. If he doesn't think the team's working hard enough, the next day of practice, he'll skate them. They call it a bag skate. So they'll skate them up and down the ice, and players hate it and everything like that. But Herb was that kind of guy that he never did that. He had the practices all scheduled out, and the conditioning was done with a purpose. It wasn't done as a punishment for not performing properly. To me, the best leverage you've got to get a player to play his best is ice time. And if the player's not playing, you say to him, I just think it goes to the whole communication thing. I say, okay, listen, here's what we want you to do. Here's what you're not doing right now. And if you don't do it, you're not going to play. And I think some of the best coaches I've seen are like that. It's not about yelling and screaming and playing all these mind games and everything. If your goal is to get the player to play his best, then that you use ice time as that leverage. If he doesn't get the ice time, then he's not going to be able to perform. He's not going to be the player that he wants to be. He's not going to earn the salary that he wants. And that's your leverage as a coach. You play him because he's earned that spot. If he doesn't earn the spot, he doesn't do what he's asked to do, he doesn't play. And I think that even goes for youth sports too. To yell at kids and skate them and all that kinds of stuff. Listen, I've lived through that. And I've done it as a coach myself. And I look back at it now and I realize it just didn't do any good at all. Like I just think it's really the ice time. And I think it's the explanation to the players right from the start of the season that this is the expectation for you as an individual. This is the expectation for the team. And if you don't do what you're told to do, you're just not going to play. And I think the best coaches follow through with that. The ones that don't follow through with it, they're the ones that don't get the results too. And I'm obviously prejudiced here in New York with the Rangers, but I watched Quinn coach the Rangers. And that's one of the things I see. This team's starting to really play well now. And that's what he does. He said, listen, if you're going to do what I asked you to do and work hard, then you'll play. If you don't, I'm not going to be mad at you. I'm not going to berate you in public, but I'm just not going to play you if you're not going to do what I asked you to do. So.
I just did a story yesterday about a player who plays in the American Hockey League named Josh Healy, who has developed an app which allows players only to rate their coaches, no different than what we see online, rate your professors in college, rate the people in your area who have businesses. It's just
we rate our reporters too. Like we rate our
yeah. I mean, you could. I mean, there are all sorts of apps that allow you to do that. So I mean, this is just kind of in keeping with the theme. But I went and looked it up, and for the most part, because again, they go to painstaking lengths to assure that they only have legitimate players. Like they check to verify that the person says who he says he is. And I went and looked at them, and the majority of coaches, and they actually rate agents as well, by the way. Mm-hmm. The majority of coaches and agents have actually positive reviews for how they do their job. But a few that I found, and the players are hard on them, and it's very similar themes. Lack of organization, poor communication, not knowledgeable about the game, made me hate the sport. Those kind of things. And I think that's kind of a valuable tool for players because, if I'm a general manager and owner, like as a consumer, if, you go to Yelp for restaurant reviews, I sort of take those with a grain of salt because I think people tend on restaurant reviews to want to say something negative to kind of prove their value. But they're helpful if a majority or a lot of people don't like the place, well, I think the same is true on coaching reviews. If you have several players who point out that this guy had a fault, and one person said that this college coach was lacked integrity, and another player agreed with that. Yeah. Came and said, "Yeah, I agree with that." So I think it's it's not the end all and be all, but I sort of like the concept, and I think it's a good tool. Like the guy that has the app doesn't do anything with it. He doesn't notify the league or the team or anything else. They're just sitting out there.
Right. But to me, it's kind of interesting. It's a great point. I just think back when I was a player, like I mentioned Herb Brooks all the time. If I was to write a review on Herb when I was playing, I probably would have had some negative reviews on Herb for some of the stuff that he did. But now that I look back all this time later, I don't think I'd have those negative views, right? Because I think I now see more clearly the things he was trying to do. And Herb was hard. He was always pushing you to become better. And sometimes when you're younger, you don't realize that's what's going on. You're thinking this guy's picking on me. I mean, like Robbie Ftorek was one of my all-time favorite teammates I had, and he coached me in LA, and I totally respected him. And one of Robbie's big things was that he was almost like honest to a fault, right? I mean, he would just tell you exactly what the truth was. There's no sugarcoating anything. And I remember we had a player out in Los Angeles. He came to me one time. He knew that I knew Robbie pretty well, and the player was kind of outraged, and he was like, "I can't believe that Robbie Ftorek. He told me he didn't like me, and that's why he wasn't playing me. He liked me as a player, not like me as a person." He said, "I just don't like you as a player." And I said to the player, I go, "Well, I'm sorry that he said that to you, but aren't you at least happy that he didn't, tell you some other story? He told you exactly the truth. This is the situation here. I don't like you as a player, so I'm not going to play you." I mean, it's almost like, it was too honest almost for that player to handle it. But I think at the end, then the player knows where he stands with the coach. There's no second guessing. There's no game playing. Then you go to the general manager and say, "Listen, I think I need to get out of here. This coach is very honest with me. He doesn't like me." So to go back to that whole, I love the rating system. It's just that, are we always ready as players, especially young players, to receive news that you don't want to hear, that the coach just doesn't like you or doesn't like the way you're playing? That's the hard part.
Yeah, I think not. I think that's really difficult to take when you hear somebody tell you. And again, let's just compare it to the other work environment. If you're a lawyer and you're trying to make partner in a big firm, and one of the partners says, "I just don't like you as a lawyer. I just don't like your arguments. I don't think they're well reasoned. That they just don't do it for me. There are other people who do a better job. You're a good guy, or a good person, but man, I just don't see you as a lawyer." I mean, you would be bothered by that as well.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting. We get some of our viewers writing in too. They're asking about coaches like Toe Blake or Eddie Shore, whether they'd survive today. If Ron Jameson wrote that in, it's interesting too. I mean, I just don't think they would. Things have changed too much.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I had a discussion with someone about Scotty Bowman, who's one of my favorite people, in all honesty. I like Scotty a lot. And I've always said that Scotty, like people want to compare Babcock to him, but in Scotty's later years with the Red Wings and Penguins and so forth, like I saw a guy that never, ever talked to players. Like, players would say, "Well, he hates me," but they didn't know it because he said something.
Right.
They knew it because he didn't give them any ice time.
Yeah.
That's the only reason they know it. He just didn't really spend any time discussing his strategies with players. But I talked to someone who said, but oh boy, in the early years, Scotty was a lot different,
Right.
and he had no problem getting into people's business and into their faces and pointing that out. And this is the question I want to ask you, because I think this is a tough one. Is it acceptable for a coach in a dressing room to come out and single out one player? And I bring that up because I'm aware of some circumstances where that has caused a major issue in the dressing room because of who the player was and so forth. It involved Mike Babcock. I don't know, that it seems like players are split on that. Like a lot of players said, those should be handled one-on-one. Some players say, well, that's just part of sports. When you make a mistake, everybody knows it, and the coach just kind of points it out. Right. What's your take on that?
Well, so I'm going to paint the picture then. So let's say it's in between periods, you're between the first and second period, and I've gone out and I haven't played well, and I've clearly made some mistakes that have hurt our hockey team. The coach comes in and points those mistakes out in front of everybody and says, Laidlaw, what are you doing? I think if you could put the positive spin on it, listen, you're always there for us, but you're not doing the job tonight. What's going on? I don't have a problem with that. I think that's part of coaching. I think that's, to me, it's important that the other team or the other teammates see that too, that every teammate is held accountable. Like if one player is getting reprimanded all the time and then he sees another player making mistakes, but the coach doesn't say anything to him in front of the whole team, it's fine to say it behind closed doors. But if he doesn't see that other player is getting reprimanded, he's like, well, why am I getting yelled at all the time? I remember one scene we had in Los Angeles, and I'll never forget this. And it really stuck with me. It was near the end of my career. I was frustrated. I'd hurt my back and I was playing terrible. And Cap Rader was one of our assistant coaches, one of the nicest men I've ever had. Great coach, really knowledgeable at the game, very thorough as an assistant coach. It was his job to break down the films and then kind of analyze and talk to the players about it. And I was playing awful, and he was very respectful to me. We were friends, and he pointed out some of the mistakes I was making. And I was in a bad place in my career. I wasn't happy with myself, and I talked back to him in front of the whole team. And it was totally wrong by me. I was disrespectful to him. And I realized right away what a big mistake I'd made. It really made me think about that kind of stuff. I thought about that story while all this was going on. I realized, coaches need to be able to come to players and point out their mistakes and know that the player is going to accept that. Now, I pointed out what happened there because I didn't accept it, and I was wrong in not accepting it, and I apologized to him right away. But I think in general, I think the coaches need to be able to come to players, especially at the higher levels. And now maybe it's different with youth hockey. They got a little bit more careful, but the NHL and pro level, I think coaches have to be able to reprimand players in front of their teammates to show this. And this is what we expect. And if you don't play, I'm pointing it out what you didn't do well. That doesn't mean I don't like you as a player. Obviously you're on this team, so we like you as a player, but you got to do a better job.
Okay. Let me, cause I know you don't like when coaches single out one or a couple of players for specific blame in a post-game press conference. You've made that clear on other podcasts. So let me see if I understand this correctly. And I'm being serious about this. I'm not poking fun at all. But the dressing room you see is the family, and you can talk openly within the family. But what you don't like is when the coach takes it outside, hangs out the laundry out in public for everyone to see. So if he wants to single out, say we're Dallas, if Montgomery wants to single out Seguin and Ben in a between periods in front of the group, that's acceptable. But if he wants to do it post game because he's taking it out for everyone else, that's not acceptable.
Yeah, totally. I agree. And to me, I also look and I go, well, what worked? Like when we've talked about like the Mike Keenans of the world, like Ken Hitchcocks, and some of the things they did, they were famous for, with these, like trying to play these mind games and sending messages through the media and everything. I don't think it ever worked. That's why I think it was derogatory towards the players, disrespectful, and I think really alienated everybody. So that's what my point was. I never saw it work. So why bother doing it? But listen, I hope the thing that comes from this is, and it's kind of going back to your initial question, is what happens through all this? Like all these players are coming forward now and talking about everything. To me, I hope what happens is that I don't know if you can have like a set of rules. It's just making people more aware. Like if you're a coach, like maybe put some more time in. It's great that you know all the X's and O's about the game, but go make some more time about communicating with the players and what really works, what gets to today's players, not what gets to yesterday's players from the 80s or 90s. These players are altogether different now. What works to motivate them? That's what I hope happens from the whole thing. And I hope that, and it seems like the NHL has been great at really taking a lead in these kind of things. And I hope that's what happens through all this.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. I think this will change the game, but it'll change it because I think coaches, for the most part, I think are good people. And their heart is in the right spot. And I think they will take stock and try to decide, okay, what am I doing that, may not be acceptable. And to be honest, I think even though there's probably more of this out there because there's more of it in society that we haven't heard about, for the most part, I think it'll mirror society. Yep. I don't think it'll be that we have more of it, that it's the hockey culture. I don't think there are a bunch of hockey coaches, taking swings at players or kicking them. I just don't believe that. Now, are there some? Probably. Just because we have it elsewhere. But anyway, let's move off this topic. I wanted to talk a little bit about the Montreal Canadiens. And, they're, it looked like they had sort of turned the corner. They were going to be an effective team and be in the middle. But now they've lost 8 in a row. And, it's pretty clear to understand what's going on there. They're 10th in the league in scoring, but they're 30th in giving up goals. And, I think this is the first time. And I really like Marc Bergevin. He was one of the funniest players I ever covered. But people are starting to wonder, is he on top of this there? Has he done enough? Why isn't he being proactive right now? What's your take on the whole Montreal situation and what's going on there?
Well, I think, first of all, it shows the power that I have. I think it's about 2 weeks ago I praised them, said how well they were playing, and all of a sudden now they lose 8 in a row, so it's all about me, as usual. To me, it's amazing that they're having problems keeping the puck on their own net, especially when you got Carey Price. I'm not blaming it on him by any way, but I just think he's arguably the best goaltender in the National Hockey League right now. They've lost the players, I guess, to Bergevin as the general manager. And I hate being like this, too. That's another former player that I don't like to say negative things about, but you got to look at the results. And he's been there for a while now, and it just seems like it wasn't like they went in and said, okay, we have a plan and here's where we're going to go. Here's where we're going to be, like the Rangers have done, where, we're going to have, like, we're rebuilding and we're going to build this team up again. I just don't see that. It hasn't really evolved where you see that it's not always going to be moving forward all the time. There's going to be the 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of mentality, but I just don't see them moving forward and becoming a better hockey team. I don't see the identity there. Who are they? A bunch of smaller guys up front, great goaltending, good defenseman. Obviously, I love Shea Weber as a player, great leader and everything, but I just don't see them having some identity. This is what we are. Just like you said before, though, I thought I saw it before this 8-game slide. I thought they were becoming that tenacious team that would never quit, grind it out. Reading some of the quotes from yesterday's game, from after the game, it appears the coaching staff and the players were happier with the way they played. They were competing, but I guess that kind of goes to the question, like, what were they doing the 7 games before? So, I guess with Bergevin, my question is, what is the identity of the team? What kind of team are you building? You look at Washington, what they're a big, heavy team. St. Louis is a big, heavy team. Boston is that character team with Bergevin and Chara leading the way. And I just don't see what the focus is, or what's the identity of that team in Montreal.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, about the identity. And it's also like, we think of the glory years of the Canadiens, and, we identify it with, players. We remember Lafleur. We remember Patrick Roy. We remember Larry Robinson. Like, they've had a bunch of guys. And I almost feel almost saddened that the Canadiens, like, if they had a Connor McDavid or a Sidney Crosby or, a big high profile, big name guy, like, Shea Weber's as a top player and so forth, but it's not the same. It seems like the Canadiens need kind of a flag carrier that sort of everybody knows. And in some respects, it's been Carey Price. Like you said, he at various times has been the best goalie in the league. So, they've kind of had that, but I think they sort of need that guy that sort of can get everybody going again and be more of an inspirational, player. And I think it would help. And I think it would get people kind of stirred up, because it doesn't take much, as we've talked about in Montreal, to get that fan base roaring behind you. and then it just becomes so difficult to play. But I think their inconsistency and their up and down play, has kind of made it kind of self-fulfilling, because they can't get any momentum over a couple or 3 years when they're really at the top of it. Like Boston has. It's their arch rivals, and Boston, has been good now for some time. Yeah. And every year, we look at them, boy, we shake our head and say, they're right there. So, anyway, speaking of Boston, I want to talk a little bit about the Florida Panthers, who are sitting in second place in the Atlantic Division. Mm-hmm. There they are, 13-8-5, and they were kind of a trendy preseason pick. Everybody thought, the addition of Bobrovsky and some of the moves they made, and there's some good young players there. Like Barkov is I don't think the national fan base realizes what a terrific two-way force he really is. Yeah. And Huberdeau's consistency, I don't think gets enough credit as well. And I think everybody thinks that maybe Ekblad will take a movement, and Yandel is the kind of player that puts up a lot of points. And, you look at that team, but, they're fifth in goal scoring, but they're 28th in goals against. Like they're way down to the bottom. It's hard to be a believer in them. And the other thing is, I'm looking at this, and this is why I brought up Boston. They're +1 in goal differential, the Panthers. And in that division, you have the Boston Bruins, who are at +34, and then you cross over in the Metropolitan, and you got the Washington Capitals at +21, and the New York Islanders +13. Like, it's hard to believe in the Panthers when you're sitting there and you're scoring about as many goals as you give up. So I want to believe they're turning the corner, but it just, I need to see more from them than what we're getting. I think everybody needs to be a little better on that team.
But maybe that's why you should believe, because I think if a lot of people felt like, Bobrovsky's going to go in there as goaltender now, and he's going to save the day, he's going to make him a whole different level of a hockey team. It hasn't been because of him. Like, again, they're having a pretty good season right now, but I don't think they're playing their best hockey. And maybe that's why I believe in them, because I think, okay, eventually Bobrovsky has shown what kind of a goaltender he can be. He will get to that level again. And then, how much better of a hockey team will it be? Now that +1 goal differential, that changes quite a bit. Right now, you get that quality goaltending that maybe makes a stop or two that he isn't making right now. And that hockey team now gets going, their confidence gets going even more. I like the team. I'm a huge Dale Talon fan as general manager, not only because of his ability, I think, to find the talented players, but I think he's really got a handle on, like, a pulse on that, that character part, the culture building. And he built that culture in Chicago that, won them some Stanley Cups. And I think he's doing the same thing there in Florida. So I'm high on Florida. I think they're a good hockey team. I don't think they're playing their best right now, particularly Bobrovsky, and he's shown he can play better. It's not that he's the unknown quantity. We know how good he could be if he starts to play the way he can. I think they're a good team. So I'm high on them.
Yeah, and we didn't even talk about Joel Quenneville, who certainly knows how to put together winning teams. He was certainly an architect of the what went on in Chicago there. I'm glad you brought up Dale Talon too, because, and this is a story I always tell. I was lucky enough to be embedded with the U.S. Olympic Committee when they were picking their team 2 Olympics to go. It was just part of a deal. Scott Burnside, who then was working for ESPN, was also there as well. And one of the things I noted from that was, here you had all the American general managers, and there was a lot of quality hockey people in there. You there had Brian Burke and Dean Lombardi and Paul Holmgren and Stan Bowman, and Peter Laviolette was part of the process. I mean, there was David Poyle. There was a long list of people. And Dale Talon was in there as well. And with a lot of great people, whenever you discussed, like, every player, like, Dale Talon to me was the guy that had the best scouting report. Like, he just knew every player, and he knew so many details about each player that it was really impressive. Like, all those guys know the league. I mean, don't get me wrong. But when he spoke, like, he knew, who were the popular guys in the dressing room, and he was just on top of everything. And it was very, very impressive. Very strong in his opinions. Can obviously make a great argument for it. Not to like Dean Lombardi, who's always could file a lawyer brief, because he is a lawyer, about every player. But Dale Talon was very, very impressive. And I've always thought a lot of him since I've heard him and watched him, involved in that process. So,
I remember him, and I was in the agent business, and he was in Chicago, but it was a GM there too. He was great to deal with because you're shopping around free agents or whatever, and even if you didn't like the player, he was all. And I guess it helped that I was a former player. We would sit and chat, and he would say, "Listen, we really don't want this player, but here's what we like about him. Here's what he needs to work on here." And he was fantastic. You're right. He really understood the game, and you know what? He loves the game too. Like I think he loves the players. He brings a passion to the game. It's his team, and he wants them to win. He wants them to be. What I really liked about him, and I think this is important as a leader too, that the leader recognizes that all the people working underneath him, they have goals and dreams, and they want to be successful. I think he was one of those guys that recognized that with players, that the team needed to come first, but those individuals needed to know that he cared about them too in their careers.
Well, we're going to wrap this up, but I wanted to get your thoughts just to see if you kind of know this off the top of your head. But
yeah.
Who in the Western Conference has the best road record?
Well, knowing that we were going to discuss that, I don't know if they got the best, but the team that surprises me the most is the Edmonton Oilers with their road record, which is pretty impressive. And I'll tell you why, because with two players, basically, Connor McDavid, and not just them, but Connor McDavid and Draisaitl carrying that team offensively, you would think on the road, the home coach that gets the last change would be able to kind of shut them down a little bit more. So that was when I looked at the stats, I saw the road record. That was the team that impressed me the most. But who has the best road record?
Well, I mean, it's always hard to say in these situations because they play an uneven amount of games. But, your Edmonton team got 21 points out of 17 games on the road. But and St. Louis technically has the best at 9-2-3. But the team that I really wanted to draw attention to was the Arizona Coyotes at 8-3-3.
Yes.
And I think you could guess all day and probably wouldn't think that the Arizona Coyotes would be the best road team. So that, I think that just speaks to what we've talked about how strong they've been and how impressive they've been out of the gate. And I'm a believer in them. I'm probably believe in them more than I believe in the Panthers, to be sure.
Good. I like it.
Anyway, you've been listening to the Laidlaw and Allen Report. I'm Alan. He's Laidlaw. We'll be back next week. Thanks for joining us.
Gotcha. See you guys.